And we are live. A very good afternoon or good lunch day to everyone. I have the pleasure to welcome you to today's live stream together with Stefan Kyora from the Startup Ticker and Thomas Heimann from SECA. We're going to talk about funding and exits in 2023, and we're going to discuss and take a look behind the numbers of the Swiss venture capital report that has been published in January. First of all, Stefan, Thomas, very well welcome, and thank you for taking the time to answer our questions today.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation.
Thank you.
So let me jump in directly, and a quick note before we start. All the people listening or watching this, you can also ask questions. Just comment on the live stream, and we will address the questions at the end of these sessions. If you have anything else you want to know from Stefan and Thomas, please leave a comment so we can address it in this live stream. So getting started, Stefan, you are the editor-in-chief at startupticker.ch. Probably all of us are subscribed to your newsletter and check out the news before going to work every morning. You have been working there for over 10 years. So I think if anyone knows what has been happening in the Swiss startup ecosystem for the past decade, it's probably you. So what is your take on how the startup scene has changed in that decade?
Yeah, thanks for the nice words, Silvan. Of course, I mean, there are some things everybody knows. So everything has gotten bigger. There are more startups, more investors. Everything goes faster nowadays. We have more unicorns. So everything evolved in the right direction. That's the results, not only from the venture capital report, but also from the Swiss startup radar that shows that we have very high numbers of financed companies, financed startups per capita in the country. So that's all very good, good results, not only of the past 10 years, but also of the past 25 years or something like that, when all started in the 90s. However, we all know there are some weaknesses of the whole ecosystem, including this topic of growth. I think we will talk about that then later, including a certain lack of collaboration between startups and Swiss incumbents, and including a lack of larger investors from Switzerland. But nevertheless, I think if you look at it, it's really impressive, and the numbers and the people behind it, the events, the organizations, everything is bigger than before and also better than before.
So overall, good growth, but still some challenges and homework to do. That's probably the summary.
Absolutely.
Thomas, if we look at your role, you are the Deputy General Secretary at SECA and also co-author of the Swiss Venture Capital Report. Often when we talk to companies, to startups in Switzerland, they complain that it's hard to finance their ventures without raising foreign capital, especially for the growth rounds. In general, do you see that this is changing and getting better? So we hopefully also have more money flowing back to the Swiss investors in case of a successful exit?
Thank you. Yeah, for sure. As Stefan said, still we have some challenges, and when it comes to growth financings and when it comes to the dependency from foreign investors, you know how it is. It's always two sides of the coin. One side you can say, yeah, it's attractive if we can, or startups can attract foreign investors. It's a sign of quality. It's a sign of that they can, they have a good management team. They can grow outside the Swiss market, and that's venture capital. In the end, it's always a global market, and if you want to scale up, then you need not only the domestic market, but then the other side is a little bit the challenge that startups did, or struggling to find domestic investors with deep pockets. That's still because when you have a look at our last survey we published this year, then you can see that we have a lot of Swiss domiciled investors with 50% and more allocation to Swiss companies. But these are only the smaller investors with and with smaller amounts they are investing, and the larger funds with the deep pockets or the foreign investors, they tend to invest opportunistically. Maybe if they invest in a 60 million round, then it's once a year, and then they come back only 2-3 years later. And so overall, I think it's very important that we have also Swiss domiciled investors going forward with deeper pockets, because they can open the doors to foreign investors and help that Swiss startups can grow and realize their plans.
Yeah, fully agree. And I'm sure we're going to touch up on that subject a bit later again. Now I want to really focus on the latest Swiss Venture Capital report, looking at all the data from 2023. And for everyone who hasn't seen or read the report yet, you can actually download it at startupticker.ch. There under the assets column, you find the latest PDF to download for free. And Stefan, we heard before, there has been a great, multiple years of really good growth, but in 2023, the amount of total capital invested actually fell significantly. So what happened?
Yeah, I mean, you talked about the history before, and I think it's important to see what we see here is more or less a normal cyclical downturn, and so we had a boom for more than 10 years, and this cannot continue forever. That's absolutely clear. And at one point in time, there will be a downturn. And this now happened. The reasons for that are outside of the startup ecosystem. So these are the economic uncertainties plus the inflation, and then higher interest rates, which make other investment categories more attractive. So these are factors outside what startups are doing, but this is absolutely normal that this happens, and we will now see how this will continue. So it's a clear drop of close to 40% regarding the invested amount. That sounds to be very much, but it's still above the pre-COVID level in Switzerland. So Switzerland is still quite stable, and that's also at the moment. I think everything is okay. So it's not really a deep crisis, but we will have to see how this continues.
So if I understand you correctly, it sounds like a big drop from the outside, but if you put it into perspective, it's still quite okay how we are doing in Switzerland.
Yeah, compared to other countries, that's for sure the case. So it's better and more stable than other countries. However, I mean, that's a macro perspective. So for the founder looking for money, I mean, it's not very funny at the moment. It was much easier 2 years before.
Of course. And what sectors were most affected by this downturn of the total capital invested?
Yeah, we can see what is important here to speak about 3 different sectors. So on the one hand, ICT fintech, they had a clear drop of 50% and more. I think that's a result of the COVID hype that was not so huge here in Switzerland, but anyway, it was there, and we have this downturn that's a little bit deeper than in the other sectors. On the other hand, we have clean tech. That's really a success story, and this success story continued also in 2023. Also, the invested amount is a little bit lower due to the very large round of Climeworks in 2022, but there's a clear upward trend, and that looks very good. And regarding healthcare, there we have an encouraging development, but on a low basis. So biotech, there are funding rounds. The numbers are higher than the year before, but on a low basis. So this is okay, but still not very good.
Very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. And Thomas, if you look on the other hand, trade sales are also down, not only the total invested capital, but also the trade sales, the exit opportunities, both when it comes to Swiss buyers, but also to foreign buyers. We heard there are external factors. So to what extent does the Swiss ecosystem, to what extent is it also affected by what happens outside of Switzerland, especially also from a trade sale or exit perspective as well?
Yes, this is also a trend what we saw last year. This usually, the exits are more, or the exits from foreign buyers are affected by the international flows, the risk aversion. How it for larger companies, they tend to behave, cyclical, and it's easier to sell an acquisition to their own shareholders in case we have a very good environment. And now it's a little bit challenging, the higher interest rates, then risk aversion, then and all the international flows are then more affected from this macro environment. But in the end, what you said before, until or in the first half of 2023, we had seen more Swiss buyers. That was a good sign on one hand. On the other hand, these Swiss buyers disappeared somewhat in the second half, but probably they will come back because at the moment I think it also depends on the environment in 2024, because M&As probably are a substitute of later stage rounds. So if later stage rounds are less often, then probably we will see more M&As, because as Stefan said, fundraising is a constant task, and it's difficult for the startups to raise larger amount of money. So probably they were pushed to or urged to sell the company, or at least a significant stake of the company.
That's a very interesting perspective that I didn't see coming yet. In that regard, the M&A deals might increase in activity, but would that also mean that the M&A deals are worse deals from an investor's return perspective, because you sort of run out of other options to continue getting funding to grow further?
I think in currently this could be the case, because but we can the thing is we can track most of our figures, but M&As is a little bit more difficult because usually the valuations are not known to the public, so we cannot track this closely. But if at the moment larger rounds are less often, then it's a tendency that we will see more exits. But let's see how, because in the end, it's for a startup, they always have to evaluate several options from if they want to raise a new round, if there is an M&A, or for healthcare companies an IPO. So there's still multiple options to consider.
And that's your job as a founder to make that happen, of course. Stefan, despite the downturn, we did see some pretty big investments, namely Distal Motion, Get Your Guide, or Taurus that come to mind. Which sectors are getting the most funds, and why are these sectors getting these funds?
Yeah, I mean, generally in Switzerland, the investment landscape is very diversified. So that's important to keep in mind. Historically, we had the largest share that was going to biotech companies, and then during COVID and 1 or 2 years before, we had the largest shares going to ICT companies, and now we are back to a very even diversification with more or less same amounts going to having this 3 large sectors that I already talked about. So on the one hand, ICT, fintech. On the second pillar then is clean tech, and the third pillar is healthcare and their biotech with not so very much investments, but quite a lot. And large numbers and more health investments. What is also interesting, what we saw is something that we do not that you do not see in this sector distribution. That we had a lot of companies last year that are active in the robotics drones sector. You already mentioned one example from the medtech area, Distal Motion, but there are also others from the drone industries or from agri-tech, so using robots in different application fields. That was quite important last year. And also you can then see that 6-7 years back, we really had a wave of new companies in these fields coming out of the different universities, in particular ETH Zurich and EPFL. So this was also remarkable for me, this strength in robotics that we now really see also in resulting in large financing rounds.
And that's probably also the time frame, right? You said 6, 7, or even 8 years. That's exactly when you then start seeing the results of the investments and the company growth over a longer period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. So companies like that, they then really have to have traction in the market to be able to rise larger amounts, and that they are able to do this shows that they are not only having a good technology, but that they also can sell it in larger quantities in different markets. And of course, nowadays also that they do not lose too much money with that, so that they're close to break even or even earning money on the product itself.
And Thomas, if you look at the report, we also see that clean tech is the undisputed queen of 2023 in terms of fundraising rounds. Is it fair to say that this sector is no longer a trend, but actually a fixture of our economy going forward?
It's a very good aspect. As Stefan mentioned, clean tech, when we look back in 2015, we had only a couple of rounds, and with a relatively low amount invested. And when you see now that we have clean tech is at the top with 650 million last year, and then split it into 30 plus rounds, then it's a clear trend. And I think it's also a sign of the maturity of the ecosystem, because the largest round last year was Atlas Agro. It's a similar when you compare it to Climeworks. They raised 250 million, and you can see that clean tech investment probably needs more or investors with deeper pockets. And I think it's also a sign that the ecosystem is growing not only in size, growing in development stage. You can see that, and I think and also there are in Switzerland, we have some clean tech investors around. They probably invested earlier more abroad. They now rethinking the strategy and maybe see some opportunities to also increase their allocation to Swiss-based clean tech companies in the future.
Fantastic. And one other thing, despite talking about sectors, that you also analyze in the report is the location. So Zurich continues to dominate the VC scene in Switzerland. So my question to you, Stefan, is, will we ever see the Romandie level the playing field with Zurich, or is that a bit an unrealistic assumption?
Yeah, I must say I don't like this kind of question because I mean, yeah, it doesn't matter. I mean, the benchmark for Zurich is not Romandie, and the benchmark for Romandie is not Zurich. So I mean, we have to compete with clusters like the Boston area or Stockholm area or Tel Aviv area or Singapore area. That's where we should look at, and not if one part of the country has more investments than the other. However, I mean, I think if you take into account that Romandie with the cities where the cities are smaller than Zurich, I think the difference is not that large. If you are, I mean, I'm quite often not only in Zurich but also in Lausanne, and if you are there at the EPFL Innovation Park or Biopol, I mean that's really impressive what you can see there and how this startup and transfer activities have materialized in really a thriving ecosystem, and so I think it's fine in both parts of the country, and it's one of the very few things I always say. So we should compare Switzerland with this other leading startup hubs, and we should not compare Canton to Canton.
I like that because we usually tend to all think in our own little gardens, as we say in Switzerland, right? But it's actually, we are one team, one nation, so to speak, that should actually compete on a global scale. So how do we compare to these other hotspots around the world? Do you also have some data on that comparison?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we are not only publishing this venture capital report, but also the Swiss Startup Radar now for several years, which has always a focus topic. So the last one was focused on AI, and the one before on sustainable startups. And generally, I mean, that will not come as a surprise. So when it comes to early stage companies and to deep tech, Switzerland is doing quite well. Also, if you compare it with really the top ecosystems like Boston, like Israel. So if you, for example, take into account the number of financed startups per capita, then we are on the level of Israel. That's very, very good. And I think that's also a result of all these support activities of the last 20-25 years. And then you see a little bit weaknesses and strengths. So clean tech sustainability, that is really improving very fast. So there we can also slowly keep up with very good countries. ICT, there's still, I think Switzerland is still lagging a little bit behind. Historically, Switzerland is not an ICT country, and it still not is an ICT country. With AI, this might change a bit because usually with the good universities and the good engineering that we have in the country, the more complicated things get, and the more deep tech, the easier it is for Swiss startups to compete with other startups. So this results for AI startups were better than for the usual ICT startups. But there is still a way that we have ahead of us.
Got it. That's really interesting to see that international comparison. And Thomas, my next question goes to you. No matter where the ecosystem is, if it's the Swiss ecosystem or any other one globally, you always have, of course, the startups, but then on the other side, you also have the investors, the VCs. Now, with the sort of challenging times that we are in right now, how do you see the VCs bouncing back, the VC funds themselves? Do you also see a downturn there where less capital gets invested into VC funds and then less funds are available to invest into startups, or are they less affected by the current market conditions?
What we saw last year was an eye opener, I would say, because it's clearly the contrast or the opposite, I would say, because at the moment, or when we conducted the research last December, we saw around 52 rounds funds in fundraising at the moment. And that's clearly one of the highest number we ever seen. Before last we had 55, now 52. And around half of these funds are achieved a first closing. So they can now start to invest. And that's clearly also an increase what we saw the year before. So there are more funds, new or first-time funds, emerging funds, but there are also more established ones, second, third-time funds, with an established team behind, with the entrepreneurial setup. And that's also, I'm thinking it's very important that Switzerland have in the future has more funds with an entrepreneurial approach. So that the founders or that the investors know the founders, how they have to grow, scale up, etc. So it's better to speak as a founder to a founder-friendly investor, in brackets, it's always there are different mentalities, different incentives behind, but in general, I'm quite optimistic that we also see more Swiss domiciled funds with Swiss focus, such as Thunderful or VentureKeep, what we just or they announced the closing of or the first closing just now. So and the only thing and it's and that's something we are talking since several years is that the funds need to be bigger in size. But you cannot say, it can be done overnight, of course. We saw with some funds now, they have 80, 100 million fund or the target. That's still good, or it's a good size. But we need also, the 250, 300 million funds, which can participate in these larger rounds. So they can then invest in this 10 to 20 million pocket, and there we have the bottleneck at the moment. But the result, and that's something we are pushing also at SECA, is that we need to raise the awareness of VC as an asset class. So it's not yet in all, in pension funds, they still not yet there. So I think it's also a question of it could change over time, but it's a question of there must be a change in a generation change. We need also the investors thinking more or have more an entrepreneurial setup, or they look outside their boundaries, not only invest in traditional asset classes. They should also have a look at non-traditional. I do not like this word so much because, or alternative for me is, how it is. If there is it's only an alternative, then probably you should not invest. So I think that must be changed. And at the moment, fundraising is so dominated by family offices, private individuals. That's good. But to reach a next stage, we need also the deeper pockets.
Absolutely. Fully agree with that statement. And another focus area with, having a stronger Swiss focus could also be the IPO market. In 2023, there was one company that IPO, the Swiss company, Oculis, a Romandy biotech eye care startup, and they did so at Nasdaq in the US. So from your perspective, Thomas, will we see Swiss companies continue to go public in the US, or could you also see a shift towards going public here in Switzerland in the Swiss stock exchange?
Yeah, there are initiatives ongoing. You know, the Swiss exchange, they are initiated the Sparks segment. They are educating also startups. I think that's a good that's a way how you can do it. And you mentioned Oculis as a biotech company. Usually, biotech companies tend to go public and on the US Nasdaq because they can raise larger amounts of money there. They again the deeper pocket sitting there, the crossover investors. And so that's biotech. And I think for a biotech company, it's or in the US, it also depends on where your larger market is. You know, in the pharma market in US is by far the largest globally. Yeah. So and investors and US investors they probably urge the biotech companies to have a domicile there. You know, a Delaware company or something different. Biotech is a global market. I think. It's sometimes also they need to raise a large amount of money, 150, 200 million. That's in Europe a little bit more difficult. I think Europe, and we saw in the past also Euronext IPOs, but it's still difficult because if you do a listing on a European stock exchange and afterwards you do not have the liquidity, and only a few coverage from banks or brokers, then it's very difficult that you can raise the next the follow-on rounds, because it's not, you know, in biotech or when you do an IPO, then it's not the end. You need probably you do then a growth financing, and you need then to raise money at the public markets, and if you do not have the visibility or then it's very difficult to raise more money from new investors. So there are good examples. We saw CRISPR Therapeutics. That's also one very good example how you can do it. They have now received the first approval. They raised 300 million plus amounts in a follow-on financing, but we still need more of these examples that they can also serve as a role model to upcoming IPO candidates.
Yeah, that's really important. And as we heard before, we still do have some homework to do, like the need for bigger funds, etc. And there are also new initiatives coming up, like Deep Tech Nation Switzerland. And I wonder, Stefan, you have been around for a while now in the Swiss startup ecosystem. How could they, or what role could these new initiatives play to really get that homework done, but also to really boost and influence the Swiss startup ecosystem?
Yeah, I think that they are very important. I mean, I mentioned early stage startups and the number of newly created and financed startups in the country. That's very high. And as I said, that's clearly also a result of the support organizations we have. And in this area of founding a company and regarding deep tech projects even before that, so Bridge or Gebertrüf or InnoSwiss or whatever. I mean, there's a lot of support around, and then also for the first phase, so much support that sometimes founders are a little bit overwhelmed. I mean, we all know that, but we see that there's a lot, or was a lot, necessary to bring the ecosystem to the point at which we are at the moment. And when it comes to growth, there are only very few initiatives, and I think we also need more and more powerful initiatives in this area. And of course, we have to tackle the questions that Thomas already addressed. So having bigger funds there, having having institutional investors here, having a parliament that understands what makes startups special, and where we have to adapt legislation to that. And we are on the way. There's something going on almost always, and my impression is also that in the parliament, at least in the last, we will now show what is a new one, that the interest that they're interested in startups and this ecosystem. Of course, it's always slow. It's politics, but there is a change, I think. But it's now important to really push hard to get the next step done.
Absolutely. And before we open to some questions from the people watching this live stream, I'd also like to get some practical tips in here for startup founders today in Switzerland. So based on your 2023 findings, Thomas, what advice do you have to offer to Swiss startups for this year, 2024?
For only 2024.
and beyond, but this year especially.
Yeah, as we mentioned, fundraising is a constant task. These days, you cannot say raise money and then say I can wait another 18, 24 months. So you need to be aware that and the environment is changing rapidly, and there are. And so you must be prepared for several options, as we discussed before. There are a new financing round, or M&A, or an IPO in some cases. So and for me, I think as a startup founder, you should not take the first and best solution. You should evaluate several options. You should talk to investors. We mentioned before, founder-friendly investors. So you should not only go to the US because there is a higher valuation, because the mentality there is completely different what we have here. So probably US investors are very interested in your company, but then you must be aware that they will talk more about. They will probably would like to have a higher percentage in your company. You have then you are affected by a higher dilution. So it's important to have a strong syndicate, a good syndicate, because you have to be. It's a constant task. So it's not only one financing round. So you need a next round and a next following round. So you need good investors to attract new investors in a later round. So it's a very constant task, and there is no recipe for success, unfortunately. But I think in Switzerland we have a very large pool of of a lot of talents, a lot of quality. So, and we have the focus on B2B, and this should and we showed resilience. And Stefan also said before that deep technology is something what's needed here, or what we can offer to investors. And this will help also in the future, that the startup companies can raise money. But it was easier 1 or 2 years before. But I think I'm quite optimistic that good quality startups will still find the right investors, if they have the required time to find them. So you have not come to a situation where you're running out of money and then you have to decide overnight.
And how does it look on the Swiss VC side? What are sort of your points of advice on the Swiss VC side?
When it comes to investors, you mean?
Yes.
I think for investors there is a good environment here in Switzerland. You have high quality companies. You have, when I'm talking to investors in different areas, they still do not complain about their deal flow, so they can invest. And then more the difficulty is that they have the deep pockets, as we mentioned before, so that they can invest that and can do follow-on financings and do not be affected too much from dilution. And so I'm quite optimistic in this regard.
Fantastic. And Stefan, my question for you is, if you had to wrap up the entire report in a single conclusion, what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, if he keeps the perspective of what I would say to founders, I would say do not let impress you too much. So keep track, keep on growing, keep on being ambitious, and do not stay small. So that I think is the most important message here, and it's possible. I mean, everything has been getting harder, so and is still hard also in 2024. Not only investments, but also exits and cooperations with larger companies. So everything needs more work and more ambition, and even has to be pushed harder. But on the other hand, the report shows, I mean, we have clearly more than 2 billion invested last year. We have close to 400 financing rounds. So yeah, it's still there. And I mean, what I think what is a risk to the Swiss ecosystem is that more founders decide to stay small and work as a small service company, and I think that's absolutely not necessary. So there's still enough money around, and yeah, founders should keep track, should keep growing, and being ambitious.
I love that. Wake up, be ambitious, and go for the big goals. We really need it in Switzerland. I love that statement. So last chance to comment here if you want to ask Stefan or Thomas any questions, so we can bring them in here live. I also have a few more questions for you until we keep going. So I want to ask you both 3 rapid fire questions, each the same.
Okay.
The first one is for you, Thomas. You can only invest money in one startup sector for the rest of your life. What is it going to be?
As an investor, I would only invest in a portfolio of startups. You know, you need that diversification. You need. You cannot. Yeah, you know how it is. You need to start very small in one company, and then you can increase the size of your investment at later stages, and hopefully you will then find the right target that you can double up or your size of investment. But I would do this because as an investor, you always have to take care of the risks, you know, and the portfolio approach must be there.
Exactly what I told you cannot do. Stefan, what is it for you if you had to choose just one sector?
Yeah, as a journalist, I never invest in startups, so I can say something totally irresponsible. So, yeah, I mean, clean tech or sustainable startups, not only clean tech in the narrow sense, but also food, agri-tech, even sometimes AI startups. I think this would be something that is really, I mean, the trend is there and it will not be stopped. Of course, then it's extremely hard to select the winners as always, and which technologies will at the end really change the world. But I think that would be the sector where I think this makes sense from more than one perspective.
And the next question, if you had to choose trade sale or IPO, Stefan?
Yeah, both, of course. First the IPO and then the mega trade sale and going public, going private again. So that would be, I mean, that's a real success story, I would say.
How do you see that, Thomas?
It depends. No,
It depends. Fair.
no. In the end, I would do it. You can do it an IPO, then and later on trade sale in biotech. It's mostly common that you can increase the value of a company dramatically after an IPO, because the value creation is coming 2-3 years later on. So I would do this in biotech.
Of course. And if you had to describe the Swiss startup ecosystem in one word or maximum one sentence, what's your description, Thomas?
Yeah, I would say we are only halfway of the journey. So we need, as we said before, we need larger amounts of money in the growth stage. We need investors. We need also world-class investors, not only world-class startups with an entrepreneurial thinking, and as well, Swiss company, they have the quality, and that's a seal also for foreign investors. And I think that's a very good starting point to attract a good syndicate of investors for upcoming financing rounds.
What's your word or sentence, Stefan?
I would say maturing. So, maturing in different perspectives on different levels. So from investors to startups to universities, even including administration, parliament, of course, and support organizations. So everything. So, and I mean, that's quite good, but maybe not fast enough. And we still have a way to go.
And the very last question to both of you: what is your main prediction for 2024, Swiss startup ecosystem related? Let's start with Thomas.
I would not say a number, but a volume. But I think in the end, what we are seeing, it's quite an active environment. Maybe last year we had less later stage rounds or the larger rounds. Maybe they will come back. We will see more of those this year. And that was really the eye opener we said before, with the 52 funds in fundraising and with more local investors. I think this is a good starting point. They have the money. The money is committed over the next 3 to 5 years, so they can invest into Swiss startups. And then I hope that we will see a very good number also for this year.
Amazing. And your prediction, Stefan, for this year?
Yeah, I mean, here at Startup Ticker with our 5 news every day, I think slowly we see a shift to bootstrapped companies, and also very strongly growing bootstrap companies. And this is a little bit new in Switzerland. And I think as long as this lasts with the harder financing environment, I think there will be more of these companies coming up, which are growing strongly, but outsource everything or however they then do it, so that they are able to really grow quite fast, but do not need money at all, or at least not that much money.
No. Fantastic. I think that's a wrap. We took a look behind the numbers of the Swiss Venture Capital Report. And I would like to thank you both, Thomas and Stefan, first of all, for the great and really important work that you do with the report, and also all the other things that you work on, of course. But I think the report is a really important part and a glimpse of the ecosystem to see how we're doing. And also thank you very much for taking the time and for being with us here today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Silvan.
Thank you.
I wish you all a great rest of your day, a fantastic afternoon, and I'm sure we're going to talk the latest in 1 year when we have new numbers to share. Thank you, everyone.